Now we've had a chance to do some polygon modeling, I wanted to show you some display shortcuts that might make your life a little easier as you apply those modeling steps. The first one is under Display, under the Display main menu, under Heads-Up Display. Heads-Up Display gives you a number of menu items that will give you readouts within your view panel. They'll give you various statistics or various bits of information about what you have in the scene or what you're working on. So if you choose Display Heads-Up Display Poly Count, so that becomes checked, you'll get a heads-up display. And that's broken into vertices, edges, faces, tris, and UVs. Faces is actually a number of quad faces. Tris is a number of triangular faces. Again, since quads are really made up of 2 tris each, that's why the tris read out is twice as much as the faces. Now, the first column is the total number of these items you have in the entire scene. The second column is the numbers you have for whatever you have selected. Now, I only have one object right now, so the columns match. But if I were to make another object, like another primitive, like this sphere, you'll see that the second column differs from the first column. Again, first column is the total in the scene, second column is what you have selected. Like here's the totals for that pedestal. And the third column is the number of items you have for whatever is selected in terms of subcomponents. So let's say I go to vertex mode and select some vertices on this pedestal. It'll give me the count up here for the total number of vertices I have selected at that moment. So again, scene column, object column, and component column for whatever you have selected. So this is a great way to see what your statistics are. Now, it's often important to know, for instance, how many faces you have. If you work at a game company, they probably want to know how many triangular faces a model has, because they have to make sure to keep the models relatively light. Now, you can hide this display once you have it by going back up to the menu, Display, Heads-Up Display, go back to Poly Count and turn that off. Now, there's some other display items in the same menu that are quite useful. If I go back up to Display, and this time go to Polygons, here's a list of subcomponents I can show on the screen. Now, some of these are similar to what you can do with the status line, but some are unique. In fact, some you can only get to from this menu here. Now, some are common, but you do have extra control. For instance, if I go to Display Polygons Vertices, I can turn on the vertices at this point, and for whatever object I have selected. Now, you do have to select the object first. So I go back to Display Polygons Vertices, and there are the vertices. One really nice thing is you can change the size to this menu. So once I have them displayed, I can go back to Display Polygons Vertex Size. And through the Vertex Size option box, I can choose different sizes. In fact, as I change this slider, they'll get bigger or smaller. And this is great if you're having a hard time seeing the vertices or having a hard time selecting them. You can set them any size you want. You can leave this option window open or close it and come back to it later. Now, in order to hide these, what you can do is deselect the object, reselect it as an object, go back to that menu, Display Polygons, and go back to vertices once again. Once you go back to the menu item a second time, it'll hide them. Another option is to go up to Display Polygons and go all the way down to Reset Display. This puts the special display back to its default state. So whatever components you had displayed to this menu will be hidden once again. So that's Reset Display. Now, another useful component you can show through this menu is normals, and we've talked about normals a little bit already. So I'll go back up to Display, Polygons, Normals, and there are actually 2 different normals you can show. There are face normals and vertex normals. Now, both of these are simplified versions of the real normals you have in your model. Again, surface normals occur at the corners of your faces, in other words, where the vertices are. And for example, on a quad face, you'd have 4 of those normals. So if you have a corner where there's 4 different faces coming together, you'd have 4 different normals. So you can show a simplified version of that. If you turn on face normals, you'll get a surface normal in the center of each face. In other words, instead of 4, you get just 1. If you turn on vertex normals, you will get normals displayed at the corners, but it's the average normal that averages all the normals that correspond to that one corner. Let's try vertex normals, because that'll be a good thing to see in relationship to hardening or smoothing normals as you had done in an earlier video. So vertex normals, and here they are. Now they're kind of long right now, so it looks kind of hairy, but if you zoom in here, or dolly in, you can see there's one normal per corner. And that's the average normal position for all the normals that really exist at that corner. But you can see that they're roughly perpendicular to the surface. Now they're long right now, so they overlap quite a bit. So what you can do though is change the normal size to make it a little bit easier to see. So I'll go back up to Display, Polygons, and there's normal size. And that works in much the same way as vertex size. I'll bring up the option box for that, and I can change the normal size. I can make them long, that's way too long, or I can try to shorten them up. And if you need to, you can enter a number by hand into this box. So there's 0.15, that's pretty good. So let's talk a little bit more about how the normals work. Let's look at corner here. Again, here's a situation where you have a hard corner. This face makes a severe turn to get to this face. It's an edge or a ledge right here. You can see that the normals right here are roughly 90 degrees apart, and that's the angle that comes into play when you do the soften and harden. I'm going to close this option window. If you go back up to normals, you go to set normal angle. This is the angle that relates to this angle. So in this case, these two normals are roughly 80 degrees apart. That's larger than this value of 30, so if I were to apply a tool now, this transition between this face and this face would be hard because this angle is larger than this value. And that's why if I set this to 180, well, they're definitely not 180 degrees apart, so those get softened. If I set this down to 0, well, that angle is definitely bigger than 0. It's not less than 0, so therefore it still remains hard. Again, in order to be softened, the angle has to be smaller than the value up an angle. So if you're not sure what's going on with soften and harden, what you can do is go back to the display and turn on your vertex normals to remind you how that operation works. I'm going to close this window for now. So that's the vertex normals. I'm going to go back and turn that off. And just to make sure I'm going back to the default, I'm going to go use Reset Display once again. Before I do that, let's leave this menu up for a second. You'll see there's a lot of different components. Some are familiar to the status sign, your right mouse button, and some are very unique. Some you may never use, but it's a good menu to try, if nothing else, just for manipulating vertices and then looking at your normals to see how they run. So I'm going to reset this and get rid of these. And then we're back to the default display. Now you also have component types for NURBS. It's under a menu that's close by. If you go up to display, there's NURBS, and NURBS also have a list of components that you can turn on through this menu.